Hello everyone, in today's video this will be an hour's worth of old stories I have previously narrated on my channel, so this will be a compilation. But without further ado, let's get straight into these stories. To give you a little background about myself, I'm a female from a South Asian country. That being said, there are some states which are relatively safe. 2019 had been a rough year for me, but by October I started feeling rather better and decided to take a solo trip for my birthday. I spoke to some friends and decided to head to the small village down south. My brother helped convince my overprotective mother as he'd already been there. To put her mind at ease, I decided to get pepper spray. Unfortunately, we couldn't find one, so I kept a bottle of deodorant and a knife handy. I decided to stay there for 5 days and booked a room at a guest house only for 2 days, thinking I'll check out this guest house that my friend had suggested and hopefully move there. To tell you a little bit more about this village, everyone is extremely friendly and warm, and they have tourists coming from all over the globe. Once I got to the room, I was a little paranoid because it seemed a bit dingy. Forget about a security system, the latch on the door was barely functional. The first night was a bit unsettling, but nothing happened. The next day was my birthday, so I rented a bike and went on exploring the village. Sometime after lunch, I decided to check out the guest house that my friend had recommended, which was a little secluded but extremely peaceful. As I reached there, I was greeted by the owner, who showed me around. This place had big huts on one side and a row of small rooms on the opposite side. I decided to take the latter as it was cheaper and I didn't plan on being in the room much anyway. We exchanged numbers and I told him I'll move in the next day. The next day, I got there and had lunch with the owner and he told me about the history of the place and a bit about himself. I realized that he wasn't around when my friend had been there. I was trying to read him, seeing if I was getting any creepy vibes from him since I was going to spend 2 nights there. I didn't see any red flags in particular. After lunch, I went to a restaurant that was right behind the guest house. I met some of the locals whom I was already acquainted with. Along with them were 2 new guys, one of whom was from my city. The 3 of us instantly clicked and started hanging out. Once it got dark, we came back to my guest house to chill, when the owner told us that he's planning a bonfire with some of his guests/friends who were sitting at another table. An hour passed as we ate and played cards, but those guys didn't seem like they were in the mood for a bonfire and soon left the place. Since the owner had already set things up, we decided to spend some time by the fire with him. We were all sitting and talking up until midnight, when the other 2 boys decided to take off as they weren't staying there. I told the owner that I head back to my room too. He tried to convince me to stay a bit longer, but I didn't want to be alone with him. My room's door had around 4 to 5 locks, but only 2 of them were functional. So I locked them and realized that the windows facing each other did not have any panes and the curtains were made with scraps of thin cloth, which meant anyone could peep inside and see everything. So I went into the bathroom to change and clean up. As soon as I stepped down and started taking my stuff from my bag, I heard someone whisper my name, twice. My heart skipped a beat and I froze for a few seconds. I decided to ignore it and quickly shut all the lights. Before going to bed, I decided to keep the bin right in front of the door, so in case someone tries to open it, it would make some noise. I took out my deodorant and knife and kept it right next to my pillow before laying in bed. I kept looking at both the windows on the side to see if anyone's outside. After about half an hour, the metallic door started rattling violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Instantly, I stood up and got hold of the knife and deodorant. My mouth went dry and my heart started beating fast. I didn't know if I should scream because I only knew of one other girl who was staying in the opposite hut. After what felt like forever, the door stopped shaking and I collapsed into the bed. I checked the windows to see if anyone was walking by, but no one did. I tried to think of what it could have been. Maybe it was just the wind, but the curtains hadn't moved one bit. It had to be a person. I don't know when, but I passed out soon after. I woke up around 6 AM to see that it was almost bright outside. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, when it started happening again. Frantically, I shut up in bed again, ready to attack. But once again, it stopped after a few minutes. I didn't understand what was happening. I went closer to the door and got a look at the bin that I had kept by the door. It had moved away from its original position. Yes, something definitely happened. Not knowing what to do, I decided to go back to sleep. When I got out of the room later, I tried to read the owner's face, but it was just as hard to read as the day before. What worried me the most was that I had to spend another night in that room. I decided to not let that thought spoil the day and went out with the 2 friends I'd made for a trek and then to watch the sunset from a hilltop, where all the locals gathered to play music in the evening, including that owner. My new friends and I went somewhere else after that and then around 10 decided to head back to my guest house for dinner. As I was nearing the hotel, I got a text from the owner asking where I was. I didn't think much of it because it was late and he was probably wondering if I was safe. I didn't reply as we were almost there. When we sat down on the futon, the owner said I was just about to text you and show me the message he typed on his phone. I was just thinking about you. I'm not sure what that meant, so I looked at his face trying to read him and realized he was trying to do the same. Quickly I decided to act normal and told him where we were. We all sat, met a couple more people, ate, smoked, and around 11, the guys decided to head to their guest houses. At that point I got up and told him I'd head to my room too. He looked at the time and asked me why I was ending the night so early. I told him that I was really tired from all that walking and that I wanted to be up early. He didn't push any further as there were other people around. I went back to the room filled with anticipation and dread, but thankfully nothing happened that night. The next day I checked out, but my bus wasn't until 5 p.m. I didn't want to be left alone with the owner, so I met up with the guys, leaving my luggage at the reception, which was also the eating area. When I came back, I picked up my bag and thanked him and left in a hurry. I still have no idea if it was the owner or the only helper that I saw around. Whoever it was trying to forcefully get through my door, let's not meet. I may have been 8 to 9 years old. I lived in a nice little middle-class neighborhood. One of my best friends, Raven, lived across the street diagonally, one house down, so I often spent evenings at her home after school. Raven's mom would always call my mom to let her know I was leaving and to expect me in the next minute or so. This way mom knew to unlock our front door. Often she stood and watched from the screen door to make sure I got across okay. I had begun noticing this beat-up red car, possibly an old Volkswagen or Buick, that would pass by almost every night as I ran back across the street. I would always head home just after dark, so possibly around 8:30 anytime I was leaving Raven's house. It was always rolling super slow, speed limit was 25 miles per hour, and I want to say this vehicle was always passed at maybe half that. One night as I was leaving perhaps a bit later than usual, I stepped out the side door of Raven's house just as the car was about to pass the house completely. It stopped in the road and backed up as I approached the side of the road. The window rolled down just as the car stopped in front of me. A little woman with short reddish brown hair and blue framed glasses was smiling sweetly at me. "Hi sweetheart, it's a little late for you to be out right now, isn't it?" she asked me. Her voice was low and pleasant. "No, mom lets me. I'm just walking home," I replied stupidly. "Oh gosh, how silly of your mom. There's all kinds of bad people out late at night. Where do you live, sugar? I'll give you a ride." Just then, my mom came bursting out the front door and screamed, "Leave her alone," as she began running to me. The woman's pleasant demeanor dropped and I heard her mutter a word, possibly as she slammed her foot on the gas and took off at well over the speed limit. She didn't stop at the nearby stop sign, just blasted through it to make her escape. I got a nice lecture that night, but also a lot of tight hugs. My mom was super glad that she chose to look out the storm door to check on me instead of just letting me wander home. I could have been taken, and she told me as much. I cannot remember if the police were called, but I never interacted with any officers. This doesn't end here though. Like most little kids, I really liked setting up lemonade stands. Like most little kids, I also enjoyed hand making and baking cakes and brownies and cookies, and also selling those at my lemonade stands. About 2 weeks after the prior incident, a beautiful sunny Saturday, mom helped me with the baking and helped me make lemonade and set me up in the front yard with my sign. She had been paranoid ever since the prior incident and had hardly let me out of her sight, aside from school and the bus, and this was no different. She stayed outside with me all while I sold my little treats to passerby, until she had to run to the restroom. It would obviously be a pain to take everything down and bring it inside while she went, and then to bring it all back out and set it up again. She figured I'd be okay for a few minutes, considering it was the middle of the afternoon and usually kidnappers aren't that stupid. Mom left me alone for several minutes when she went to the bathroom and presumably went to grab a snack as she was gone for 10 or so minutes. A familiar face walked up, about 8 minutes in. She appeared from around some bushes down the street. I didn't see her in the distance walking up. I honestly saw her stand up from behind some bushes and brush herself off and begin walking towards me. Her clothes were smart and sophisticated looking, almost like a pantsuit. It was a real clash with how ratty her car had been, but that same placating smile was on her face and her eyes glinted behind the same glasses. "Aw cute, a lemonade stand. Hi again, sweetie. Sorry for bothering you the other night. I didn't realize how close to home you were. Mama told me to not talk to you. Go away." I said it as meanly as I could muster, but mom had rightfully made me so frightened of this woman that I'm sure I just sounded like the scared little girl I was. "Come on now, Mary." She spoke my real name, first and last, and my eyes got big. "I'm a friend of your parents. I live down the street. Remember, we met at the pool this past summer. I had no recollection of her. If you're their friend, why did you leave so quick?" "Mom," I began shouting for my mother. This made her crouch down in front of my table, eye to eye with me. "We don't need to do that. I just want to talk to you. You like to bake, right? I have a really fancy kitchen with a nice baker's oven. All sorts of cool gadgets to make baking cupcakes and stuff like this super fun." "No, no, no, Mama." I stood up and pushed the table into this woman and started running for the front door. This woman kicked the folding table away and started to chase me until my mom appeared in the doorway. She flung the door open and I barreled into her and the woman stopped running and stood in the yard. "What are you doing to my daughter?" my mom shouted at her. "My God, your child is rude." I was just trying to buy a cupcake and she shoved the table into me and ran. Now I have lemonade all over my clothes. The woman lied through her teeth. I don't think she was expecting my mom to come back. That's the lady from that night in the car. I was now trying to get around my mom and hide behind her. My mom pulled out her cell phone and this time I know she called the police. The woman immediately ran off back the direction she came. The cops appeared, one took statements while the other one patrolled the neighborhood searching for her. They ended up finding her car parked at the grocery store that was up the road about half a mile at the other end of the neighborhood. They waited for her to show up and claim it. She never did. They couldn't find her. So, random lady in the red beater, please, let's not meet again. This happened a couple years ago when I was 16. I had just recently got my first job at a chain sandwich shop. It was located in the shopping mall outlet at the far end. There were quite a few businesses around it, including a restaurant down the way and a super Target on the other side of the mall on the far end of the parking lot. My parents were always super protective and taught me at a young age to be aware of my surroundings and protect myself, and rarely even let me walk alone to begin with. On this particular day, I had left my phone at home because I wasn't allowed to have it at work and had a daily time limit on it anyways. Thanks, Mom. I had ended up finishing up my shift early, and my mom was still shopping at the Target, so told me to go ahead and walk over to meet her. I began walking towards the Target and had to wait for passing cars. One silver car stopped and let me walk across. I smiled and waved thank you, and the man in the car did the same, and turned on the street going the direction I was walking. I didn't think anything of it, as it was a relatively busy parking lot and most of the shops are over on the other side by the Target. A minute or two goes by and I spot the same car now driving in the opposite direction towards me. I make a mental note but think I'm just overreacting. That is, until he turns back around. At this point I'm concerned and notice I'm now a part of the mall that's a little less crowded with a more empty parking lot. I get this uneasy feeling in my stomach that he's following me, and to test my hypothesis, I switch my direction. Instead of heading towards the Target, I walk towards the restaurant. The car immediately turns into the parking lot. I switch into freak out mode and speed walk to the front doors. In my time of panic, I didn't realize that the parking spots for the restaurant were completely empty. I pull on the doors and they're locked. They were apparently closed on Sundays. At this point, the man in the gray car was parked in the lot in front of the restaurant watching me. The way he was parked, I would have to pass this car to go back on the path I originally was on. I stand there a moment pretending not to notice and think about what to do next. I obviously don't want to walk any closer to the car than I already was. I decide to cut through the side shrubbery of the restaurant and head towards the closest shop I could find. The gray car comes out of the parking lot still following me and I bolt into the dollar store across from the restaurant. I see the gray car park and I walk up to one of the cashiers and explain what happened and I ask if I could use her phone to speak to my mother. She says of course and tells me to stay in here until my mom comes to get me. I call my mom and tell her about the car and she of course freaks out. By this time, I think the man in the car caught on because he eventually backs out and leaves. My mom shows up and thanks the cashier lady and we drive to the Target. Aside from us both being shaken up, we were okay. It definitely ruined me for walking alone again. Now that I'm an adult and live on my own, I carry pepper spray and a plucking knife anywhere I go just in case. I rarely walk anywhere unless I'm with someone or it's only a few minutes away. It still scares me today to think of what could have happened, or what that man's intentions were. So, to the man in the gray car, let's not meet again. This all happened last summer when me and my childhood best friend, we were both 15, decided to go camping for her birthday. We were originally supposed to be a 5 to 6 person group, but it ended up being just the two of us. So we met at her grandma's house, me with my scooter and her with her mom in a car, and headed to our camping site for the next 2 nights. The camping site was very deep in the woods beside a public trail, but there were still neighbors who had a lot right next to the one we were using. My friend's mother warned us to not go take a walk on the left side of the trail, which would lead us to the weird and possibly dangerous neighbors. We obviously listened since we didn't want any trouble at all. So after unpacking most of our stuff, her mother left, letting us alone in the middle of the woods with only a 50cc scooter to get out in case of emergency, which, don't get me wrong, is very useful but not very fast. So we started doing our thing, eating junk food, listening to music, catching up on both of our lives, since we haven't talked in a very long time. She moved away a few years prior to this, so we don't get the chance to talk to each other that much. The sun was slowly going down. It was getting darker and darker. We were talking and singing when we heard an ATV coming on the trail. It was coming from the left side. Me and my friend freaked out a little, so we basically just locked the door and ran to the back of the camper. The ATV stopped on our camping site. We could hear 2 adult males talking to each other about whatever knows what. It took something like 5 minutes, but they finally left. At this point, we weren't that worried because we thought it was just some curious people who wanted to know if there was anyone in the camper, which had already been robbed in the past, so we just continued our stuff, listening to music and all. By this time, it was already dark outside and the moon wasn't out yet. leaving us with no other lights than our candle. There was no water and no electricity in the camper, which also meant we had to go outside to use the bathroom. Fortunately, it was a full moon night, so eventually the moon would come out and we will be able to see outside pretty well. So again we were talking, everything else was quiet, no music, no animal noises either, and then we heard an ATV coming our way once again, so we turned out all the candles and stopped talking, waiting in silence. We quickly sat on the ground of the camper to make sure no one could see us from outside because the curtains were still opened, and then we listened. The ATV stopped a little before coming up to our camping site and everything went silent. A couple minutes after that, we could hear footsteps all around the camper. Yes, it could have been an animal, but with the ATV sound and what happened after, we know it wasn't an animal. The steps eventually faded away. We then quietly moved to the back of the camper, closing every curtain, making sure the door was locked. We brought 2 knives with us. We eventually heard another noise. We immediately went silent and we hid the candlelight. We then heard the noise again. It was like someone was trying to open the camper door just by turning the handle. We then heard footsteps going all the way around the camper, and we could hear the person testing every single window to see if any of them were opened. We were almost crying. After they tested all the windows, the steps faded away with maybe 1 hour of tranquility and silence, during which we were quite panicking. When we finally calmed down, we heard noises at the door once again, but this time, it sounded more like someone was trying to unlock the door with the lockpick. We could hear the lockpick inside of the mechanism, and then the person would try to turn the handle. After 5 minutes of trying, the person probably got mad and started turning the handle angrily and punching and kicking at the door. We were freaked out. I had my brand new iPhone in one hand, hesitating on calling the cops or no. No service was available at this location, but 911 can still work most of the time. The noise was still going on at the door and all around the camper. This lasted for at least 30 minutes. The person was trying every window and then at some point gave up once again. We then started to make up a plan. The noise at the door happened a couple more times. We acted as if we were more than 2 people in the camper, so we started acting like my friend's mother and sister were there, as if one of our guy friends was there, and we acted like the noise woke us up and we screamed at the people to go away and we got mad. Our plan worked, I guess, since we heard multiple people running away. The next morning, after making sure everything was okay, we got out of the camper and we saw that a bunch of the plants next to the camper had been stepped on. There were footsteps everywhere in the mud and everywhere around the camper. Since it was daytime and my friend's mother was supposed to come back to see us, to make sure we were okay, we decided to sit outside waiting for her. We were walking around waiting when a car slowed down in front of our campsite. It never stopped, but we saw the driver staring at us. Then maybe 10 minutes later it went by again and again and again, always giving us that menacing stare. When my friend's mother finally arrived, we asked her if anyone tried to prank us or make a joke, and she went on and asked every possible suspect, and no, it was not a prank. Everyone promised that if it was them, they would have told us, but it really wasn't them. We didn't sleep alone this time. We had someone else come sleep with us for the second night. I'm just glad they weren't able to open the door to the camper. So I'm 23 now, but when this happened, I was 17. In my last year of high school, I was the art girl. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement for our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at a local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So for my school, I had to get a half-hour bus to the center of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course, and this happened the 5th week. The class was really interesting, and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 PM and it was pretty dark by the time I got out. So 4 weeks walking there and back, uneventful. 5th week walking there, totally fine. 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. 5 minutes at the bus stop, it was very freaky. So the stop I had to wait at was outside the expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops and it's also pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So I must have been one of the first people there, so I'm standing just outside the shelter because I'm smoking, and obviously I don't want to be a jerk and make other people breathe in my smoke. So there's only about a few minutes left to my bus and I'm minding my business when this guy comes and stands super close to me. Like, not as in infringing a bit of my personal space here close, like literally I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s and just had that general creepy vibe and looked really grubby. So obviously I'm a bit freaked out and sidestep away. So does he. I look at him and he has the creepiest smug grin. But at this point I'm like, okay, he's trying to freak me out and he knows I know. I step away again, like fairly far away this time. He follows me again and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I do not know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or their own conversations. I guess it must have been just that. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I don't want to overreact, maybe it's just a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. So anyway, it gets worse. After dodging this creep for a few more moments as time dragged in slow, finally this bus comes around the corner. I know if I get on this bus before this guy, he is going to sit next to me, which is what I want to avoid. So politely I gesture and say after you. He gives me that creepy look again and says no, you go first. I insist but he refuses again. There's a big queue now and I don't want to hold anyone up, so reluctantly I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are only in pairs, so there's no way he could sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty, so where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. I'm just sitting trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair and his hands are on it. I pulled out my phone and tried to text my mom, but the sending bar would just stick. It happened to literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening and that I thought that if I got off this bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus up a long straight road, so my friend calls my mom and tells her what's happening. My mom then calls me and relays what my friend had told her. Now, I'd been on this bus for about 15 to 20 minutes and my stop was coming up in 5. It's not a big city. My area is suburban and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. I'd never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, my mom called. I just said to her, I will be getting off this bus in 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now and meet me. As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop. Literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang into my arm and drag his body hard across me as he walks past. Stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he actually had bad intentions, or if he just got off on a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact he pressed the button as soon as I confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he did intend on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. This happened this past year, my senior year of undergrad. I attend a big university with 2 bus stops. The first one is for a smaller portion of the school, and the second one is the main one that people use, but they're pretty far apart. I got out of class and was next to the small bus stop around sunset. This guy, I'll call him Eric, comes up to me of all people in line and starts asking if this bus would take him to one of the student housing areas. It was kind of odd because it was partway into the year, but whatever, he seemed genuinely confused. I explained yes, this bus would take him there and his stop is the same one I get off of. He asked if he can wait in line with me and he was nice, so I said sure. We're talking and waiting for the bus and it doesn't come, so I decide to walk to the main stop and he follows. Again, at this point it's not creepy because it's just small talk. We walk to the other bus stop and we just jump on one over there. Eric sits next to me and is berating me with questions that I'm now answering very shortly. Then everything he says is flirty, like, yeah, come see my pool so we can tan. Let's work out together and get sweaty in the sauna. All very weird and random, and I just don't say much because everyone on the bus can hear the conversation. He then asks for my number, which I lie about, but this guy says okay, let me call you. Obviously, I get a call and Eric's just confused and I just say oh my bad. I knew he would call it again, so I just gave the right number. Now I'm regretting telling him I stop, but I still get off with him. He's continuing the flirty comments, but the street I'm parked on is opposite of his route home. I say goodbye and wait till he's out of my sight and to get in my car and drive away. At this point it's late and he was gone, so I just went home and forgot about it. He texted me a couple times the next few weeks, all of which I ignored. Eventually he stopped and I forgot about the encounter. Fast forward a few months and I rarely use the bus anymore because I have a parking pass. One day after class I decide to go to the Vons right next to my original bus stop. I park in the farthest row because it's very busy and my car is in the middle of the row. I'm on a quick mission, so I'm rushing down the first aisle and some guy turns around to check me out, but I ignore it and keep going. I felt the guy's eyes on me still and thought, how do I know this dude? Then I get in line and there he is at the front of the line grinning at me. It's Eric from the bus and I'm like, screw this, so I switch lines. He checks out way before I do and leaves. I get my stuff and walk out to my car. I was parked just far enough that you couldn't see my car, just the direction it was in. As I get closer, there's Eric standing right in front of my car. This was disturbing because he wasn't waiting at the door of the store or in the middle of the lot. Nope, right at my car. He positions himself in between me and my car and he's grinning and he says, "I know you." I played dumb saying sorry, you must have me confused. He says, "No, you're from school." I say, "No, that's not me, I don't go to that school." He believes me and starts aggressively asking me out. I say, "No thank you, I have a boyfriend." He says, "Okay, so you can't have friends?" And I look at him and say sarcastically, "Do you really want to just be friends?" He just grins at me and replies no. He then says, "Don't worry, when you're single I will find you." The way he said it was very unnatural and creepy. He finally gets out of my way and lets me into my car. He watches me leave the parking lot and I drove to my brother's house just because of how unsettling that encounter was. On one occasion, I came from a group project and had to take the bus. It was crowded when I got on, so I sat in the first seat I saw. I could hear the conversation behind me and instantly recognized Eric's voice. The girl he was talking to seemed to be really into the conversation surprisingly. But now here I was on a bus to a school that I told this creep I didn't go to. I tried to get off quickly but somehow Eric and the girl got off before me. I'm relieved and try to keep a distance. I don't see them anymore and turn a corner and there he is again waiting for me. He doesn't move though, he just grins at me and says, "Hi, are you going that way or this way by now?" He used my real name and the fake one I used when I played dumb at Vaughn's. I just walk away and call my friends to meet on campus. The shelter in place was issued the next week and I moved home. Luckily I never have to see Eric again. This story is from my days as a gas station clerk. This happened during a football Saturday, so the store was full of people from the moment I walked in. Most of the night is a blur because it was just cashiering for the first 6 hours of my shift. It was around 3 a.m. and things were finally starting to taper off. There were only a dozen or so people in the store. I just usually kept my head down and focused on the transaction in front of me so I wouldn't get overwhelmed, only looking up now and then to make sure the store isn't on fire and no one's stealing the wine case. I wasn't even looking around when I saw him. I just saw something strange in the corner of my eye and spun my head to look at him. When I got a good look, I was startled. This guy's skin was almost translucent white and he was soaking wet. His teeth were gritted and looked too big for his mouth. He was shaking as fast as he walked past the counter. I could hear the bathroom door slam from around the corner. I went back to my transaction and told myself that I needed to remember exactly where he was. I couldn't forget he was in the bathroom. I rang out the next few people, watching for him the whole time. After another 10 minutes or so, the store was suddenly empty. Customer rushes tend to be like that, from 100 miles an hour to just nothing. I knew he was still in the bathroom. I thought about going to knock, but I felt repelled. I had no intention of going near that door. I look at the clock and it's nearing 4 a.m., which is when I need to start brewing coffee for it to be ready when my manager comes in. The coffee grounds are all in the supply closet behind the counter, so I tell myself it's totally fine to go get them. It satisfies both my paranoia and my arrogance as well. I'm still doing my job, but doing something I believe to be tactically the best move. If for whatever reason the guy opened the bathroom door and tried to run behind the counter and do something to me, I could shut the door and lock it from the inside. Besides, the bathroom doors are old and loud. I can easily hear them open from inside the closet, so I can just come out and wait near the panic button until he leaves. This all seemed like a very good idea at the time. So I decide to go get the coffee packets and I'm listening carefully while I load up on all the flavors I need. I figure I will only be a minute or so I don't even turn the lights on. I'm listening carefully and I don't hear anything. I still don't hear anything. Then I hear a weird noise. It sounds like the water pipes in the back hissing at first, but it's too ragged. I suddenly realize the noise is breathing and it's getting louder. Then it's right on top of me. That's when I stood and turned to leave and saw him in the doorframe. We just stood there both staring back at each other. Later when my manager reviewed the footage, she saw him leave the bathroom by slowly pushing the door open. Without making a sound, he had wandered behind the counter and peeked into her office, stepping in far enough to trigger the automatic light. After that, he had wandered behind the food service counter before making his way to the open supply closet door. The next thing she saw on camera was me flipping out. I stepped backwards, my body shaking so hard my knees almost buckled. At this point I think he realized how absolutely horrifying this entire scenario was to me. He put up his hands and started apologizing awkwardly. He was really twitchy and still gritting his teeth. I basically went on autopilot for a moment and said I wouldn't talk to him until he got out from behind the counter area. He walked backwards until he was barely on the other side of the employee's only entrance, standing next to the soda machine. He began asking for an iPhone charger, telling me he was lost. He said he had no money and just needed to charge his phone here until he could call for help. I told him I don't have an iPhone charger and I couldn't help him. He sighed and looked down for a moment, seeming to think about what to do. Then he flipped his head back and screamed as loud as he could. He then punched the soda machine, hard. I backed up and ran around the counter, up to where the panic button was under the register. I watched him as he walked around the store, punching the walls and kicking the counters and screaming. I heard myself shouting over and over, "Get out right now." After a second he stopped and turned around to look at me. He quietly apologized before wandering out of the store and running off into the dark. At this point I was shaking, but tried to pick up and keep working. I started brewing the coffee, checking the windows to see if he was out in the parking lot, but I couldn't see him. After another few minutes, a regular came in and told me a strange man had come up to him asking for a ride. He said the guy was soaked and his teeth were gritting. That's when I decided to call the police. They found him in the parking lot next door, screaming and punching the moving trucks. They took him to sober up and calm down. They informed me that he was very sorry for losing his cool and he was just very drunk and very lost. He had come from out of state for the game and got separated from his friends. In the end, nothing bad happened, but it made me realize that something easily could have. My skin still crawls thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town, didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the one my folks paid for during undergrad behind. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights he would end up ahead of me, some behind or beside. At every light he positioned himself so he could stare at me, either directly or in one of his mirrors. His gaze was unwavering and my anxiety rose. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. Finally, at a red light where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, unwavering stare. He saw that I was terrified and he was following me, and he was trying to force me to pull over. At one point I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow a couple of cars ahead of him thinking I could shake him. Nope. He went around the cars to the light and ran the red and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I'd hoped to lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment to keep following. At another light where he was beside me, I pulled through the light and then he turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red to follow me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction, in a new city, I really didn't know what to do, so I turned on some music and forced myself to sing along and forced myself to go to the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of the lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked out front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted because something told me this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. He was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch him. The police got the surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dodging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw my surveillance footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough to grab my elbow. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck, waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. My heart sank. I was able to remember 6 of 7 digits of his plate and the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said she said since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particular unlawful and was a losing case to try to charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer and went on with my life. I had no idea what this guy did just a handful of months later until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted the law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case and, after verifying some things about his vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making stuff up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but qualified her statement by saying at least you don't have to worry about him anymore because he got life without parole. I only wish something could have been done when he terrorized me, perhaps things would have been different for Sandy. So yeah, creepy murderous stalker crazy dude, let's not ever meet again. I go for a short run every night, right after sundown, when it's finally cool out. I always take the exact same route, a loop through a quiet and sparsely populated neighborhood, and now I realize how easy of a target that's made me. A short section of the route passes by an unlit park. A couple of weeks ago, I'd seen a guy hanging out behind a truck that was parked next to the entrance, and it was so unusual to see someone else up there that I decided to be extra cautious, turn around, and head back home. I didn't get close enough to get a good look at his face. A few days later, I saw what looked like the same guy by the park again. I figured I was probably just being paranoid, but I decided to turn around again just in case. I hadn't noticed any activity by the park in the last several days, so I resumed my normal route and didn't even think about the guy I'd seen up there. Then last night, as I was passing by the park, I had this inexplicable feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't spot anyone nearby, but the park extends into pitch black darkness, so someone could easily hide there unseen. I decided to just keep running, look confident, and try to hurry past the park as quickly as I could. Suddenly, I smelled a strong wave of cologne in the air that immediately put me on edge, and I'm pretty grateful he was wearing it so it tipped me off. After I smelled it, I had no doubt in my mind that there was somebody nearby, but still, I didn't see any movements in front or on either side of me, and I was afraid to turn around. Immediately past the park, there's a bend in the road. There's a house on the corner as you turn down the road. The house has lots of tall bushes in the front yard. I normally run right past those without even thinking of it, but since my gut instinct was blaring like a siren, I quickly moved to the middle of the street as I rounded the corner. I shot a glance behind me to see if anyone had actually been nearby. I saw a man slowly walking through the front yard of the house on the corner, looking towards me. He paused behind the bushes, as if trying to remain hidden. I could see his jeans and a pair of black-white sneakers, but little else. His slow footsteps were so creepy that I can't get the image out of my mind, as if he was trying to be quiet as he could. If I hadn't made the split decision to run into the middle of the street and away from the yard, I would have been within grabbing distance. I turned on the flashlight on my phone, aimed it right at the bushes hoping it'd startle or blind long enough for me to get some distance between us, and started sprinting at full speed down the road. It was probably the fastest I've run in my life. At the end of each block, I glanced behind me to check if the man was there. Fortunately, I lost sight of him. If he decided to sprint after me, I'm not sure what I would have done. From what I could make out, this guy was at least a foot taller than me. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had dissipated and I was shaking with fear. I couldn't sleep at all that night. What scares me most about the whole thing is that I'm 99% sure this was the same guy I'd seen hanging out in front of the park recently, and now I can't shake the idea that he'd been watching me and calculating the right time and path to try to sneak up behind me. He knew that I always ran past there around the same time. The thought that he was probably watching me from the darkness in the park last night before quietly moving out of it and starting to follow me makes me sick. Needless to say, I won't be running past the park at night anymore, or running alone at night, period. The terror I felt when I turned around and saw the guy's shoes slowly moving behind the bushes and his head facing me is like nothing else I've felt before. I live in a small town, the kind where almost everyone knows each other, and it also really creeps me out to think that this might have been someone I've seen around town in the past. Part of me wishes I could have gotten a better look at his face for the police report. So this encounter took place approximately 10 years ago when I was 15. I was from a suburban area where my part of town was divided into a grid, approximately 8 blocks long and 8 blocks wide. Me and my friend Jesse were walking home from another friend's house who lives on almost the exact opposite of corner of the development from me. We were on the way home, and as usual I walked him to his house and then walked to mine. We noticed a blue Ford Bronco was circling the blocks throughout our walk, but didn't really think anything of it. We got to his house and we hadn't seen the truck for a few blocks. I assumed I had nothing to worry about. I get another 2 blocks or so and I see the truck again. He was parked on the side of the road, but you could hear that his truck was still running. He followed me all the way home, but was sure to not take the exact same route. I got to my front porch and could see he's parked just a few houses down on the same side of the street. I mentioned it to my dad, an absolute mammoth of a man, and he went out to see the truck. He saw it and started walking down to it when it took off. 2 weeks go by and I haven't seen the Bronco since. This walk home was almost a daily routine at this point. We had a snow day from school and just me and my sister were home. I'm playing on the computer when something catches my eye. Directly to my right is a window and there's a man standing in it. Now this window's on the first floor, but still approximately 5.5 feet off the ground, bi-level house. This man's entire head and body still fit the window. He's got curly hair, a full beard, and looks to be pretty big as he fills almost the whole window. We locked eyes and I ran out to confront him. I know, stupid. He ran off down the street to the same blue Bronco parked in almost the same spot as last time. He pulled off faster than I could catch him. This time I called the cops. I gave them as much information as I could, and basically all they said was they'd keep an eye out for him. I showed them where he was, and they were able to confirm it by the footprints in the snow leading to and away from the window. Now what had me a bit concerned was I wore a size 12 shoe. My dad, who was still significantly larger than me at this point, wore a 14, and his shoes were still a bit smaller than the imprints in the snow. Well then, we're screwing with Bigfoot now. A few weeks go by and there hasn't been any more weird encounters. My head's been on a swivel every time I'm out of the house. I don't want to say that I was looking for a problem at this point, but I was. I was kinda hoping that this dude would show up and try something. I was ready for it. I wasn't ready. Me and Jesse were walking home from the same friend's house one night and we saw this Bronco again. Screw it. We're young and stupid dudes, so we figure we're gonna trap him. We went completely out of our way to go to the only dead end in the development to try to get to him once we confirmed he was following us. You never know it was a dead end unless you knew the area because there were never and still aren't any dead end or no outlet signs. I guess he had an idea to what we were doing because he knew where we both lived. He didn't follow us down. We thought it was the perfect plan because of how many moves he'd have to make to turn around. Several cars parked on the street, and it's not a cul-de-sac, just a road with no outlet, and thought we could run up on him when he tried to back out. He outsmarted us that day. The next day on the same trip, from the same friend's house, on the same road we see him again. I walk my friend home and figure screw it, I'm fine. I dare this dude to come out at me, and he didn't. This happened several more times over the next week or two, until the guy decided to make his move. I was on my way home after just leaving Jesse at his house. I got another block before I saw the truck. I'm walking perpendicular to his truck when as soon as I'm in his path, he turns on his lights. I ran up the few blocks to my house and waited on the porch to see where he was and what he was doing. This time he stayed put just a few houses down. I told my dad again and he went out to see. Truck's still there. Me and my dad start walking down to the truck and it's still not moving. This ballsy dude had the audacity to get out of his truck to confront us. Terrible idea. He gets out when my dad is still 25 feet from the truck. I guess my dad is about 6'4" and under 300 pounds with a body built by Bud Light and manual labor. This guy though had some size on him. What I saw next was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life. So my dad's not much of a talker, and at this point he's already got a problem with this guy. The guy gets out of his truck with the most sadistic smile on his face. My first thought is the guy has a gun. I yelled to my dad that he might have a gun, and all he yelled back was, "I got it." Well, he definitely had it. They walked up to each other, and before a word was even said, my dad swung. The dude was done in. Before he even started to crumple, my dad hit him again. He hit his truck and hit the ground. I never saw the guy again, and after just moving back into my parents' old house with my young son, I hope I never do. So big dude with the blue Ford Bronco, I hope you never come back to my window. So this happened about 14 years ago. I was 21, and it was the days of MySpace. I never used my real name online. It was in the mode of constantly posting pictures of me smoking, etc. So yeah, I happened to work at a local sandwich shop, and upon taking an order from a customer, I hear, "Hey, aren't you?" enter my MySpace name. To which I asked why, of course, and he proceeded to tell me his MySpace name, and I realized we have randomly commented on mutual friends' pages. Okay, whatever. He and his friends sit in the dining area and eat their lunch, but before leaving he came back to the counter. I thought he wanted a refill on his drink, so I went to the counter to ask him what he would like. "Would you like to get drinks with me sometime?" I was a little surprised, but fresh out of a bad breakup and was ready to date, so I said sure, why not? I told him to message me online later and we could work it out. Cut to 2 days later, it's Friday, and he picks me up and we head to a bar across town. I had known this bar was there forever as I grew up there, but had never been inside. We were the youngest ones there by about 30 years, and there was literally only 10 people total inside, including us and the bartender. Weird, whatever. We have a few drinks, play some pool, and it's time to leave. I kept my pace and only had 2 cocktails because I didn't want to get drunk with someone I didn't know. He, unbeknownst to me, was about to be pretty tossed, so we leave. Not wanting to go home, I agreed to go to his house and hang out some more. He lived with his grandmother at the time and had a pool table. We wandered the house for a bit, him showing me random pictures of him growing up, awards won, etc. We play a game and I let him know I need to be getting home. I lived about 20 minutes away by car. He says he's too drunk to drive and that I should stay. Now, I lived with my mom and we didn't always see eye to eye, so calling her 2 to 3 a.m. and waking her up to ask for a ride was not in my list of plans. I told him fine, I would walk. It would have taken me over an hour to walk home, but I was not about to sleep at this guy's house and would have rather taken my chances. The route home didn't go through any bad areas, and I had been a pedestrian for years at that point, so I was used to walking everywhere and was fine with it. All of a sudden, he can drive and doesn't want me walking home alone. Again, whatever. We get to my house and I thank him for the ride, and now he tells me he is too drunk to drive and can't drive home. The place my mom and I lived in was 3 stories, and I had the whole bottom floor to myself and a makeshift living room with couches, so I figured screw it. Sleep it off on the couch and go home in the morning. By now, I had already decided this was going to be the only date we ever went on. Not because of the whole driving situation, but I just wasn't into him. He proceeds to lay on my bed the minute I let him inside like some stray dog or something. So being tired and annoyed and just basically over it, I said fine, I'll sleep on the couch. Well, I don't know how long I was asleep or how he even stayed awake, because it took me forever to fall asleep knowing he was there, and this was all just too weird. I wake up to this guy's hands around my throat. Well, kinda woke up. I remember laying there with my eyes closed and my mind thinking, what's going on? So I pretended to roll over to basically let him know I wasn't unconscious, and he stopped. 20 minutes later, same thing. This time I sat up, pushed him away, and started yelling at him. What are you doing? Get out, now. And the strangest thing was, it was like he wasn't even fully there. His eyes were open, but it's like he was in a trance and wasn't even fully aware of what was happening. I grabbed his keys and wallet off the table, opened the door, shoved him outside, threw his keys and wallet at him, and slammed the door. He never knocked or anything, and I kept the lights off so he couldn't see me watching him through the window, phone in hand ready to call 911. My mom was 2 floors above asleep. He kind of staggered off where I couldn't see him, so I just sat on my bed listening. 30 minutes later, I heard his car start and drive off. I logged onto MySpace right away, blocked him, and blocked his number in my phone. I showed my boss his picture the next day, explained the situation, and just let him know that if I ever saw him walking again, that I was walking to the back until he left, and to just tell him I quit. Never heard from him again. I, a 23-year-old female, grew up in a rural area in Ontario. It was the kind of place where you never lock the doors because you know everyone in town. The all too trusting small town mentality stayed with me once I moved to a big city for university. I got an apartment in a student area with a college nearby and plenty of bars within walking distance. I lived with a guy friend, Roddy, who was a few years older than me from the same small town. I would go to the bars with friends on the weekends and stumble home by myself around 2 a.m. One night on my way home, my neighbor, Kyle, and I met in the hallway, both headed to our own places. He was also drunk and good looking. He said hello and invited me inside. I ended up staying the night with him. He was nice, and it was a fun night, if not a little awkward. We didn't exchange numbers, and it didn't seem like we cared for anything to come out of it, so I went home in the morning and that was that. Fast forward to 2 days later. I was asleep in my bed, and my roommate was half asleep on the couch with the TV on. He heard a sound that might have been the door creaking open, but he ignored it in his tired state. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes to see a naked man standing in front of him, lifeless and staring into his eyes. It was Kyle. Roddy tried to talk to him and ask him what he was doing here, but he didn't respond. Roddy ran to my room and said, I think Kyle's here to see you. So I followed him out into the living room and saw completely naked Kyle, staring at us with the most serious and concentrated eyes I had ever seen. Roddy tried to talk to him and asked him to leave, but once again he didn't respond. Instead, he went into our kitchen and opened the fridge. He proceeded to take our butter out and start smearing it all over his face and chest, saying nothing, and still with a completely serious look on his face. Roddy and I ran to my bedroom to talk about what to do. While we were in my room, Kyle walked down the dark hallway that led to us and stood in the dark right before the light of my room could reach him. All you could see was his silhouette, and he started whispering hi, hi, repeatedly. Roddy and I ended up calling the police and staying in my room until they came and took him back to his house. They said he must have been on drugs, but probably wasn't a threat. I agreed I didn't think he was a threat, but I didn't sleep well that night knowing he was a thin wall away from us in that apartment. My family decided to fly across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was off-season. It was late November, the weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I called a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality our room was one of the 20 to 30 quaint guest house looking buildings arranged in sort of a horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led back to the street, the other further into the secluded maze of rooms. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and it gets dark. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just wanted to go to sleep. And I did immediately. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. This was horrifically startling as it was on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I've never heard her use before. Then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I could understand. As opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming, "Get him, get him." My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe, further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline. I ran down the other path, towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say, "It's a kid." The explanation: some young teen, tall and lanky as I am in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room, our room. The one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought he was me, assumingly leaving the room. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him when he realized his mistake and panicked. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs this kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So, to the now traumatized kid from Catalina Island, sorry for the misunderstanding. For a bit of backstory, I live in a big city which is mostly a friendly place, but like all cities, it has its rough areas. There are 2 main spots that are known to be particularly rough, and for the first 14 years of my life, I lived in one of those areas. So though it can naturally be a bit uncomfortable, I tend to be pretty unbothered by odd people talking to me in the street. Anyway, I moved from one rough area and moved to a safer one, but it's very close to where I originally lived. I know both of these areas pretty well too, which helped me with what happened 5 months ago. I had some stuff going on in my personal life and going through phases of bad anxiety as it is. I had to make the decision to take some time off of work, but wanted to try and stay in a routine and be productive. I went to the dentist way past when I should have, so I made an appointment and when it rolled around, I walked there. My dentist is in the rough area that I now live close to. On my route home, I have to walk past a pub on a main road which has a super bad reputation. Anything you can think of, it's happened inside or just outside of this pub. Anyway, I noticed someone sat on the bench outside the pub. I have my headphones in but see him saying something, so I assume he's asking me for something and take an earplug out. He asked me if I want to join him for a drink. This was around 11:30 a.m. by the way. I just said no thanks. Now as soon as I got a few steps away, I had this bad feeling like something was just not right. As I mentioned though, I was going through a phase of bad anxiety, so I chalked it up to just being that. After about 2 minutes, I go to turn left and see the man walking in my direction in the corner of my eye. I told myself it was nothing, but took my headphones out anyway just in case, as I was about to walk through a narrow road that leads to a car park and is always very empty. All of a sudden I hear him shouting at me, "Hey miss, I'm talking to you, wait." He catches up to me and tells me, "I'm not a creep, but you're too beautiful to let go." I try and stay polite, but also make it clear I'm not interested. He asked if I was single. I said yes. When he asked what I was doing that night, I said I had no plans. I 100% know I should have lied, and as the truth came out, I was really annoyed with myself, but whatever. He seems to get the message, and I say I really have to go, so I carry on walking thinking that it's the end of it. So I make my way across this big car park. At the end of the car park is a cycle/pedestrian lane that has a massive wall on one side with 2 lots of steps that lead to a car park to a retail park, and bushes on the other end, and it's super narrow. I get into the lane and hear footsteps like someone is running, probably a jogger. I'm getting paranoid until right behind me I hear, "At least give me your number." I finally start to panic and realize actually it's not my anxiety and this is super shady. I give him my number but change the last digit and this guy proceeds to attempt to drop call me. Clearly my phone doesn't ring and then he starts getting annoyed saying I need to give him the right number. He then has his hand basically on my phone, standing way too close to me and orders me to type his number in and drop call him. Creep now has my number. Still not enough for him, I reiterate that I'm on my way somewhere and seriously need to get going. He then grabbed me by my elbow and I had a massive adrenaline rush. Next thing I knew I was at the top of one of those sets of steps that lead to a much busier and open space. I ran as fast as I could. Luckily one of my friends works in one of the stores in the retail park, so I ran over to it practically looking over my shoulder the whole time. I find my friend, visibly shaking, can barely speak. She asks if I'm okay and I just burst into tears. I gather my thoughts and tell my friend what just happened. He's been calling my phone this whole time. She takes my phone and notes his number and then blocks him. She takes me to the staff room and convinces me to file a police report, which I do. Unfortunately though, I found out street harassment is not actually illegal where I live, but because he made physical contact it might not be a complete lost cause. The police tell me they will be in touch. Now fast forward until around 2 weeks later. My mom's friend who knew about what happened sent her an article and asked her to show me. I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes. It was about a man who had followed a girl and then assaulted her in the same rough area. At the end of the article is a picture. It's him. I haven't heard anything from the police, and since he had already been charged, I figured there wasn't any need for me to contact them again. My heart goes out to the girl, and although currently in jail, I really hope neither of us ever have to face him again. His charge was pretty serious, so he will be there for a long time, thankfully. The following experience happened to me a few years ago when I was on the train home from school. It was around 10 p.m. at night as I had stayed back in a public library to study. One thing you should know is that my train line is particularly dodgy, and you can meet some truly weird people on the train when it's late. When I got into my carriage that night, it was particularly empty, apart from 3 women sitting on the opposite end of the carriage. I sat down and plugged my earphones in to watch YouTube. My train ride usually takes around 45 minutes. About 3 stops into the train ride, and the only other person who had gotten onto my carriage at the time was a man who was wearing construction clothes. He sat near the 3 women, so I assumed he knew them. I turned my attention back to my video. A few minutes later, I noticed that the 3 women who were sitting on the opposite side of my carriage had moved to my side. I didn't really think much of it as I was engrossed in the video I was watching. That's when I noticed someone take a seat opposite of me. It was the man who had gotten on earlier. He asked me my name, but he was giving me a weird vibe, so I pretended like I couldn't hear him. I had my earphones in after all. He then proceeded to tap my knee to gain my attention. There was no use ignoring him, so I removed my earphones and looked at him. He was a big guy, probably around early 40s, and he was clean shaven. He asked me my name, to which I gave him a fake name. He then asked me how old I was. I was in my school uniform at the time, so I told him. He reached out his hand and introduced himself. Not wanting to be rude, I extended my own hand to shake his hand. This is when things started to get weird. His handshake was super weird. His grip was abnormally tight and he seems to pull my hand towards him as he shook it. I quickly withdrew my hand. He then asked me if I had a girlfriend, as he thought I was quite attractive. Alarm bells began to ring in my head and glanced over at the 3 women who refused to even look over my direction. Seeing as they would be no help, I would just have to look out for myself. He then took out his phone and started showing me a picture of a girl who seemed to look around my age. He then asked me if I thought she was beautiful. Again, not wanting to be rude, I simply nodded and said she was. He then asked me if I would be interested in marrying her. I just started laughing as I thought he was just joking around, but his eyes were dead serious, and he just glared at me. He repeated his question, to which I responded that I did not know her and that it was inappropriate. He suggested that I give him my number so that he could arrange for us to meet. This seriously creeped me out and I politely declined, stating that I was busy with school and that I was not looking to get into a relationship. As I said this, the train was coming to a halt at a station. I was still 3 stops away from mine, but I decided that it was time for me to get out of the situation. I apologized that this was my stop and that it was nice to meet him. As I got up to leave, he extended his hand for a handshake and thanked me for talking to him. I didn't want to shake his hand, but I did not want to trigger him, so I reached out my hand. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and pulled it towards him. His eyes were full of anger. He then asked, "What, you don't want to marry my daughter? I will break you." I quickly broke the grip and left the carriage. As it was nighttime, there were always police officers patrolling the platforms. I rushed towards one of the officers and told him everything that happened. I then described his clothing and which carriage he was sitting on. While waiting for the next train, the same officer came up to me and told me that officers had picked him up 2 stations down and thanked me for letting him know. Although the officer asked for my details, I was never notified as to what happened to him. I just hope that I never have to experience a man on a train like that in the future. Alright, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this compilation. Let me know down in the comments below if you want to hear another one of these compilations every once in a while. But as always, have a nice day.